The sun was slipping behind the trees when I turned off the narrow road and onto the gravel drive. Leaves crunched under my tires, orange and red like rust on the fading day. I rolled down the window a few inches. That crisp mountain air, I'd always loved it. It reminded me of childhood trips up here, when Dad would light the fireplace before sunset and Mom would set out her cinnamon tea. The smell of pine always made me feel still. But something felt off this time. I parked, stepped out, and looked around. The woods hadn't changed. The same quiet, the same hush. But the driveway told a different story, tire tracks. Not one set, but several, overlapping, recent. My heart sank a little, but I brushed it off. Maybe someone checked on the place. A neighbor, maybe. I went to the usual spot, behind the fourth stone near the porch steps. The key was there, just like always. Cool in my palm, a little dirty from the soil. I smiled, almost foolishly, and pushed it into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Jiggle. Push. Pull. Still nothing. I paused, looked around, and knocked on the front door. No answer. I waited, listening, but all I heard was wind brushing through the trees. Confused, I walked around to the back. The kitchen window used to creak open with the right pressure, but now it was sealed shut. I tried the basement door next. Locked tight. I stood there, hands still on the knob, a strange chill rising through me that had nothing to do with the weather. And then, a sound from inside. I stepped closer to the kitchen window and peeked through the blinds. Toys. Scattered across the living room floor. Plates on the kitchen counter. A pair of muddy sneakers by the stairs. Someone was living here. Laughter, kids. And then I heard her. Dinner's ready, my sister's voice rang out, too familiar and too wrong all at once. I froze. It took me a second to move, to understand what my eyes and ears were telling me. I knocked, this time louder, sharper. After a beat, the door creaked open. She stood there. My sister. Oh, she said, eyes wide. We didn't know you were coming. Behind her, her husband appeared, arms crossed. He didn't look surprised. We changed the locks, he said casually. For safety. I didn't speak right away. My chest was tight. I stepped inside slowly, eyes darting over what used to be ours, Dad's armchair, gone. Mom's lace curtains, replaced. Everything familiar had been stripped or shoved into some corner, out of sight. How long have you been staying here? I asked. My sister glanced at her husband, then away. He shrugged. A few weeks. Their youngest ran up, tugged her mom's sleeve. Is dinner ready in our new house? Our new house. I swallowed hard. Did Mom or Dad ever say this was okay? I asked. My sister looked at the floor. We talked to Dad before he passed. He said maybe. If we needed it. That's not permission, I snapped. Her husband chuckled, low and dismissive. You were never around, anyway. There it was. The jab. The implication that absence meant forfeiture. I didn't respond. Not right then. I turned, walked down the hall to the guest room. The one room that hadn't been overtaken yet. I closed the door behind me and stood still. The quiet in that room was loud. Heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, the one I used to sleep in as a kid. My suitcase sat untouched. My hands trembled as I unzipped it. How many times had I put others first? Let them speak over me. Take more than their share. And I just let them. Because it was easier. Because keeping the peace always came with silence. But something about this, walking into my parents' home and finding it repurposed, repainted, reclaimed without a word to me, made something shift inside me. They hadn't expected me to come back. That much was clear. They thought I'd stay gone, like always. That I'd look the other way. I wouldn't. That night, over dinner, I sat at the table like a guest in my own family. They passed dishes around like nothing had happened, like I was just visiting. I'll be staying here for a while, I said. My voice was calm. Measured. My sister's fork hovered midair. Her husband stiffened. We thought you were just picking up a few things, she said. This is still my home, I said, meeting her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. The kids looked up from their plates, sensing the tension they didn't yet understand. No one said another word. I set my fork down. Thanks for dinner, I said, standing. I'm going to rest. It's been a long day. I walked back to the guest room, closed the door, and leaned against it. And that's when I heard them, through the thin walls. Whispering. Arguing. My name. I wish that first night had ended in silence. But it didn't. I woke to the clatter of pans and voices in the kitchen, already full of energy, as if the day had started without me. The smells of eggs, sausage, and coffee filtered in through the door, but it didn't stir the comfort it once had. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples. No one had knocked. No one had waited. When I entered the kitchen, the room was already moving without space for me. Darla flipped pancakes. Her husband sat at the table with the paper. The kids chased one another around the counter. I reached into the cupboard for the mug I always used, an old chipped one with blue flowers I'd claimed as mine since college. It was gone. In its place were matching mugs, all white with gold initials carved neatly on the side, D and R, Darla and Rick. Rick looked up. Morning. Coffee's hot, he said, motioning toward the pot like I was a house guest. Not family. Not someone who once carved her name under this very table as a teenager during a Thanksgiving no one remembers but me. I poured a cup. It didn't taste the same. Did you sleep okay? Darla asked, not looking up. I nodded. Quiet walls. Rick chuckled. Well, if you're needing space or quiet, there's a guest house in town. Real cozy. A few folks from the firm used it last summer. Subtle. Polite. A push. The kids hesitated before calling out, "Morning, Aunt Maris," like they weren't quite sure who I was to them anymore. The word aunt didn't sit naturally on their tongues. It wasn't disrespectful. Just unfamiliar. I smiled. Morning, you too. I didn't press. I didn't snap. I took my coffee outside and sat on the porch, letting the cool air cut through the tension I carried. The silence out here was louder than anything inside. And more honest. By noon, I was back inside when Darla mentioned it. She stood by the sink, wiping her hands on a towel. We're having a little family dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, she said, then added, you can come, of course. You can come. Not, we'd love to have you. Not, it wouldn't be the same without you. Just you can come. I'd be happy to help with the cooking, I offered, already knowing the answer. Oh, it's all under control, she said too quickly, too firmly. I nodded and stepped outside again, letting the door shut softly behind me. The wind had picked up, colder now. Or maybe the chill was something else. The cabin didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt staged, like a home set built for someone else's life. I spent the next couple of hours walking the path around the property, past where the woods grew dense and wild, where Dad once built a rope swing for us. That tree was still there. The rope was gone. Dinner was at 6. When I walked into the dining room, the table was beautifully set, roast chicken, potatoes, salad, all arranged like a magazine spread. I paused, scanned the table. 6 plates. 7 people. Oh, must have miscounted, Darla said, fake surprise in her voice as she darted back to the kitchen for another plate. Rick gestured to the chair closest to the kitchen door, right where the draft from outside snuck through. I took the seat without comment. The food passed hands. Laughter filled the room, though none of it reached me. At one point, Darla lifted her glass. To family. To unity. She looked at everyone. Everyone but me. I lifted my glass anyway. Not high, not theatrical. Just enough to meet her eyes. Halfway through the meal, Rick leaned back in his chair, fork in hand. You know, he said, grinning, it's nice to see Maris here for once. Taking a break from running away. A few chuckles echoed around the table. My sister smiled, tight-lipped. Some of us never learned how to stay, he added, cutting into his chicken. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. Instead, I placed my knife down slowly and said, sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. The room went quiet. No one responded. No one touched their food. Even the kids seemed to sense the shift. The rest of the meal passed in silence, save for the clinking of utensils and the occasional awkward cough. After dinner, I gathered my plate and stood up. I'll do my own, I said before anyone could pretend to offer. I scrubbed the plate clean, dried it, and set it on the rack. No one spoke to me. The wind outside had picked up, and I walked to the porch again. This time I stayed. The stars were just starting to poke through the navy sky. I sat on the step and pulled my sweater tighter. The same porch where Dad once read the newspaper, where Mom braided Darla's hair, where I used to pretend the trees whispered secrets only I could hear. Tonight, they said nothing. I pulled the small leather journal from my bag, flipped to a fresh page. When people erase your presence, they teach you how to make your return unforgettable. I closed the book, shoved it back in my bag. Then I saw it. A faint glow in the attic window. Not the hallway light. The attic. It flickered once. Then again. No one had been up there in years. And it shouldn't have been on. The wind had died down by the time I stepped off the porch, but a soft drizzle had begun falling. It tapped against the leaves like a memory knocking. I didn't grab a jacket. Just kept my eyes on the attic window. That glow wasn't from the hallway light. It was tucked deep into the gable, a place untouched for years. Since before Dad's accident. Since before everything fell apart. I circled to the side of the cabin, brushing past overgrown shrubs and ducking under the warped gutter. My old key still worked in the utility door. I slipped in quietly. No one saw. The stairs to the attic creaked with every step. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through thick layers of dust. Cobwebs curled like time had folded in here, and the air tasted stale with secrets. Then I saw it, a small lamp on the far side of the attic, still glowing. It wasn't plugged in. Battery powered. Beside it sat a worn cardboard box labeled in black marker, Maris, 1992. My breath caught. The box was opened, slightly shifted from its place. Someone had been in it. Recently. I dropped to my knees and lifted the flaps, hands trembling. Old notebooks. A high school yearbook. Drawings. A pressed flower. On one page of the yearbook, my senior photo had been scratched out, deep gouges over my face. Underneath, my full name, but in someone else's handwriting, she was never going to stay. And then I found the envelope. Thicker than the rest. Yellowed edges. On the front, in Mom's handwriting, "You were never supposed to see this." I sat back against the wall, heart pounding, and opened it. It was dated the week before I left for college. Never mailed. The letter was long. Rambling. Uneven handwriting like she wrote it in the middle of the night. She talked about the tension in the house, her guilt, how she and Dad had made choices. Not for the family, but for one daughter over the other. "I was afraid of what would happen if we didn't let you go," she wrote. "He told me if we didn't make room for her, she'd never have her chance." My stomach turned. She meant Darla. That line repeated in my head, each time louder. If we didn't let you go, she would never have her chance. I sat there for a long time. The sound of rain on the roof made it worse. Familiar. Like all those childhood nights when I'd lie awake wondering why I always felt second, even when I did everything right. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a miscommunication. They cleared space for her, by erasing me. "They didn't just take my room," I said aloud, the attic swallowing my voice. "They took my history." It wasn't about who had the key to the house anymore. It was about who was allowed to exist inside it. I folded the letter back neatly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I grabbed the whole box, tucked it under one arm, and made my way back down, step by step. The storm outside was heavier now, but I moved through it like stone. When I walked back in, Darla and Rick were on the couch with the kids watching TV. They barely looked up. "I went up to the attic," I said, setting my bag down. Darla stiffened. "It's full of dust," she said quickly. "No," I replied, calm and steady. "It's full of memory." She blinked, but didn't argue. Her silence was louder than any denial. I carried the box straight out to my car, wrapped it in an old blanket, and placed it in the trunk. Locked it. I wasn't losing it again. Later that night, I sat out on the porch with my journal, the box at my feet, and my laptop open beside me. I started reading every letter again. Every page of every note. And then I started digging. Public property records. Something had always nagged me about the way the cabin was signed over. Darla once said Dad updated the deed right before he passed. But the date never added up with what the hospital said about his final days. I clicked through archived filings, pulled PDFs, traced dates, and cross-checked signatures. Names appeared that shouldn't have. Signatures mismatched. Witness lines unsigned. I made a list. Dates. Screenshots. Lawyer names. Discrepancies. Copied everything onto a USB drive. Labeled it in Sharpie, "Original Truth." My hands weren't shaking from fear anymore. They were shaking because I finally had something they didn't expect. Proof. The morning after I found the letter, I didn't sleep in. Didn't even make coffee. I just got in the car and drove into town. That stretch of road felt longer than usual, like it was trying to talk me out of something I couldn't unsee. But I drove with both hands firm on the wheel, like I was chasing a ghost I'd let follow me for too long. The county records office was quiet. Fluorescent lights buzzing. A woman around my age sat behind the counter, tapping a pen against a keyboard. I told her what I needed: records on the cabin, title transfers, anything filed in the last 15 years. She raised an eyebrow when she found it. "That's odd," she said. "Looks like there are 2 records for that property. One under my father's name. The other under Emmerich's. Which one's valid?" I asked. She clicked through a few more screens, then leaned in, frowning. The second one was notarized by a guy who got arrested for fraud a couple years back. Forged half a dozen deeds before they caught him. I kept my voice steady. "Can I get a copy?" She slid the printer tray open and handed me the sheets. I walked out gripping them like a fuse. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was dipping past the pines. Long shadows cut across the porch. Inside my room, I locked the door and spread both versions of the deed out on the bed. My fingers moved between the lines, dates, witnesses, signatures. And there it was: the notary on the second deed had initialed in the wrong margin. Sloppy. Rushed. I texted Janice, an old college friend who now worked as a paralegal in Phoenix. Sent her a photo of both documents. She messaged back within minutes. "That's a civil violation at best, and criminal if you can prove intent." Intent. Emmerich's name was printed clearly on the fraudulent copy. Not Darla's. His. Of course. He'd used his job connections. Pushed the papers through a system most people never think twice about. They didn't just try to take the cabin. They tried to wipe me off the ledger like I was never part of the family to begin with. Dinner that night tasted like metal. I waited until the kids finished laughing about something on TV before I brought it up. "Hey," I said, voice light, like I was making conversation, "remember when Dad almost sold the cabin?" Emmerich paused with his glass halfway to his lips. "He did. Signed it over to me, actually. Said it should stay in the family." I nodded. "Right. But not our family." The silence was thick. I turned to Darla. Her eyes dropped to her plate. "You knew?" I asked. She didn't speak. But her fork clinked against her wine glass from the tremor in her hand. That silence told me everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about poor communication or he said, she said. It was deliberate. A decision made without me, about something that belonged to all of us. And they thought I'd never come back. That night, I sat with my journal again. Wrote down every word they said. Every pause. Every glance. I remembered something my old professor once said: power doesn't change people. It just unmasks them. I wasn't dealing with resentment anymore. I was staring straight into entitlement. Years of it. Worn like a second skin. Darla didn't want peace. She wanted erasure, with a smile on her face. So I made 3 copies of every document. Printed. Scanned. Backed up. Stored one on the cloud, one on a USB stick. I even dropped one off in the glove box of my car. If they tried to burn it all down, they'd miss something. The next morning, I acted like nothing happened. I made pancakes. Joked with the kids. Asked about school like I hadn't just discovered the biggest betrayal of my life. Darla watched me like I'd grown 2 heads. She knew something shifted. I started gathering a few things from my room: books, toiletries, clothes. Not packing. Just preparing. A storm was coming. And I didn't want to be scrambling when it hit. Emmerich leaned on the doorframe later, holding his coffee mug like he owned the place. "You okay?" he asked, feigning casual. I looked him in the eye. "Never better," I said. "You ever think about how paper can burn? But not truth?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I'd only meant to be gone an hour. Just a walk to town for groceries, eggs, bread, a box of tea bags. The kind of small errand that settles your mind. The kind that makes a place feel like home again. But as I turned up the gravel path toward the cabin, something sharp twisted in my gut. My suitcase sat on the porch. Next to it, a laundry basket full of folded clothes. My shoes tossed into a cardboard box like donations waiting for pickup. I stood there for a long minute, the plastic grocery bag hanging at my side, rain dripping from the eaves. The air smelled like pine and betrayal. No one came out. No sound from inside. When I tried the front door, the code didn't work. The small beep after each button press felt like mockery. I tried again. Then a third time. Locked. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. I knocked once, loud enough for the whole house to hear. A moment later, the door cracked open. My niece peeked out, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Aunt Maris?" she whispered, like saying my name might get her in trouble. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. "Your mom or dad around?" Before she could answer, Darla appeared behind her. Calm. Cold. The same face she used to wear when she'd already decided something and didn't care who it hurt. "We just thought," she began, smoothing her hair, "you'd be more comfortable somewhere else for a bit." I looked at her, really looked. "Was that your decision?" She didn't blink. "You were acting tense." The kids were picking up on it. "We can't have that energy here." That energy. She said it like it was a stain I brought into the house. I nodded once, set the groceries down on the porch rail. "You could have just talked to me." Her lips tightened. "You weren't exactly open to talking." I laughed quietly. Not cruelly, just tired. "No, I guess not." I gathered my things, one by one. Folded what they'd half folded. Closed my suitcase. Every movement deliberate, calm. They wanted a reaction, rage, accusation, some scene they could use later as proof that I was the unstable one. I gave them nothing. By the time I drove into town, the sun had started to set behind the pines. I found a roadside motel just past the gas station, $58 a night, cash or card. The sign out front flickered, "Rooms available." The clerk was a woman maybe 10 years older than me, her hair pinned up with a pencil. She smiled gently when I handed over my ID. "You look like you've had one of those days," she said. "Something like that," I replied. She slid me a coupon for free breakfast and said, "We start at 6, but I keep the coffee hot till 9. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older, like old wood trying to forget it was once part of a home. I set my bags down, opened the small table lamp, and pulled out the stack of papers I'd been guarding since the attic, the deeds, the letters, the notes. My proof of what they'd done. I spread everything across the bedspread and stared at it until my breathing steadied. The eviction wasn't random. It was a tactic. Push me out. Make me look volatile. Control the story before I could tell it myself. "They want you gone," I murmured, "but they forgot who you are." I opened my journal and began to write, detailing everything that happened, the bags on the porch, the locked door, Darla's words. I recorded the time, the date, the tone. Precision is power. There's an old saying I once heard, they throw you out to make you look like the problem. It rang in my head now, over and over. Then I remembered what Grandma used to say when someone wronged her, don't fight fire with fire. Fight it with facts. So I started drafting a letter to the county property office, requesting a full review of the title transfer. Line by line, I recounted the inconsistencies, attached the copies, the proof. Then I recorded a quiet video on my phone, just my voice, describing what happened that afternoon. I uploaded it to a private folder in the cloud. Twice. If they wanted to erase me, I'd make sure there was a record they couldn't touch. By midnight, I sat outside the motel room. The parking lot was still, save for a single car pulling out toward the highway. The neon sign buzzed faintly, throwing blue light across my shoes. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I didn't feel like the one left out. I felt awake. I pulled my laptop closer and typed a final note to myself, tomorrow, I won't knock. I'll enter through the truth. Then I attached every file, every photo, every note, and addressed the email to the lawyer Janice had recommended. I hovered over the send button for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of everything behind me. Then I pressed send. The screen blinked once, and it was done. A quiet revolution had begun. I came to breakfast quietly. The table was already full, Mom had made pancakes, and the coffee pot steamed beside the biscuits. Darla was laughing at something Lonnie said, while the kids poked at their plates. But the laugh didn't reach Mom's eyes. She smiled too hard. Like she was performing joy. I sat down across from her. She didn't meet my gaze. Morning, I offered, casual. Morning, sweetie, she said, turning back to buttering a scone. I sipped my coffee. Waited. Then dropped it in, plain as the toast on my plate. I looked into the deed yesterday. Lot of changes. Didn't know we refinanced. Silence. Forks paused midair. Mom blinked. Then, folding her napkin, she said, your sister said it's fine. Just like that. 5 words, flat and final. Not I said it's fine. Not even let's talk about it. Your sister said it's fine. And just like that, I saw the lines drawn. I remembered something I'd once read, silence is complicity when you don't speak for yourself. Mom didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just handed her voice to Darla like it was nothing. I watched her hands, steady, folding the napkin again. A twitch, maybe. A tell. But she didn't flinch. After breakfast, I left without fanfare. Drove down to the local lender's office, where Lonnie claimed he'd handled the family investment paperwork. The receptionist was polite, young. I asked for a copy of the original loan documents filed on the cabin. Gave her the parcel number and waited, watching a muted news channel flicker on the wall. When she brought the file, I flipped through it slowly. There it was, mortgage application from 2 years ago. Lender, Ridge Rock Financial. Property, the cabin. Applicant, Lonnie West. Cosigner, Maris Gennaro, spouse. I stopped cold. Spouse? I've never been married. Certainly not to Lonnie. They'd used my name. Stuck it into the file, probably to get a better rate or pass a background check. And now, the property was collateral under a loan tied to me, without my knowledge, without my consent. I photographed every page. each snapshot a nail into the lie they built. As I walked out, the Arizona sun felt colder than it should have. I didn't drive back to the motel right away. I parked by an empty park bench, pulled out my phone, and emailed Clara. Subject: delivery of evidence, conflict high. Body: attached images. Confirm legal status. May escalate quickly. That evening, I came back to the cabin porch. Everyone was out there again, kids chasing bubbles, Darla sipping iced tea, Mom knitting like it was 1955. I smiled, polite. Sat down on the far edge. "Thank you," I said softly. Darla raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For letting me stay. For now." She tilted her head. "We all pitched in, you know. While you were gone. We kept it going. For you." I looked at her. Calm. "That's good. But it's still my name on the title you altered." The kids went quiet. Darla's jaw twitched. Mom didn't look up. Just sipped her coffee. Lonnie leaned in, voice low like he thought he was being reasonable. "This house is ours now. Just accept it and move on." My hands curled around my knees, steadying myself. I wanted to scream. I didn't. Because this wasn't about volume. It was about leverage. That night, I sat on the back deck alone. The stars above looked fake. Too still. Too far away. I thought about every time I'd bitten my tongue over the years. Let things slide. For peace. For family. For keeping Mom comfortable. But what exactly was I preserving? A system where silence got weaponized? I pulled out my phone and messaged Clara again. Just one sentence. "I'm ready. This ends Thursday." Behind me, the cabin door creaked open. No one stepped out. But I didn't turn around. Change doesn't knock. It slips through the cracks. Wednesday morning, I rose early. Packed a briefcase with everything I had, printed copies of the emails, the fake deed, the attic letter, the financial documents. I dressed in jeans and a pressed button-down. Not for drama. For resolve. At 9:15, I sent a message to the family group chat. Meeting scheduled. I will attend. I expect respect. No reply. But the bubble showed they read it. By 9:45, I was in my car. The mountain air still smelled like pine and old summers. I rolled down the window, let it hit me one last time. This time, I wasn't leaving as a guest. This time, I was returning as a claimant. I looked in the rearview mirror as the cabin faded into mist behind me. Not a retreat. A repositioning. The light in the kitchen had that late autumn glow, gold, but already fading. I came in through the side door, still carrying the stillness from the drive back from town. Just wanted to make tea, maybe buy myself a quiet minute before everything I had to say came out. Then I saw it. Under the sink, half hanging out of the cabinet, the hand-embroidered hanky I'd stitched for Mom years ago. Pale blue cotton, edges stitched with forget-me-nots. My niece had helped me start it when she was 10. We sat on this very porch, and I showed her how to loop the needle through soft fabric. It took 3 weeks. Now it was stained, damp, knotted into a ball, used to dry dishes or wipe counters. I didn't say a word. I just pulled it out gently, smoothed it flat, and hung it on the drying rack. Behind me, Darla's knife paused mid-slice on a loaf of bread. Her head turned slightly, but she didn't speak. Lonnie looked at her, then at me. Narrowed eyes. No one asked me what I was doing. They knew. The air thickened with a silence that said everything words couldn't. I left the kettle on the stove and walked out to the front of the cabin, where my father stood with his overnight bag. He always packed light, worn suitcase, brown leather, handle patched with electrical tape. I have to run some errands in town, he said, barely looking up. Can you spare 5 minutes? I asked. I want to show you something. He didn't answer, just followed me back inside, into the small side room where I'd been keeping my files. I laid the documents out one by one. The deed. The refinance papers. The letter from the attic. The screenshots. He took them in silently. His hands trembled a little when he reached the 3rd page. I didn't know, he said finally. I watched his face, studied his voice. Maybe you did, I said. Maybe you just didn't stop it. He nodded. Not quickly. Not defensively. Just slowly. The kind of nod that tells you the truth doesn't need volume to land hard. When we walked back to the dining room, the table was already set for dinner, candles lit, silverware aligned, like it was some celebration. Darla was serving salad. Mom refilled water glasses. Kids whispered about homework. I waited until everyone sat down. Then I spoke. I have evidence. I have backup. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here to reclaim what's mine. Forks stopped midair. The room fell still. Lonnie stood up, his voice sharp. You're blowing this way out of proportion. We've done nothing wrong. I looked at him, kept my tone level. You didn't do anything right, either. The embroidered hanky pressed in my pocket like a live coal. What exactly are you hoping to get from all this? Darla snapped. Truth, I said. Not respect. Not family unity. Just truth. Thunder cracked outside, real or imagined, I couldn't tell. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Mom's face twisted into something unreadable. Then I said, let's drop the niceties. Let's talk facts. I laid everything on the table. The drone footage from the last visit. The deed showing forgery. The letter from Dad tucked in the attic. Silence. Mom looked like someone had slapped her. Dad closed his eyes and leaned back. Darla stared like she was calculating every possible angle. I won't ask anymore, I said. I will claim. And then I stood up. Walked straight past them all. Past the hallway photos. Past the porch where I once built forts with my cousins. Out into the night. No one followed. Out there, the wind cut through my sleeves, but I didn't feel cold. Not anymore. I sat on the porch bench. Let my breathing slow. And I thought, this fight, it's not just for property. It's for something that was taken long before paper was signed. Recognition. Identity. Dignity. I pulled the hanky from my pocket. Tossed it into the fire pit. Watched it catch, curl, blacken, then turned away before it burned all the way down. I'd already said everything that needed saying. I walked into the living room holding the unopened gift box I had carefully wrapped last year. The fall echoes were fading, but the fading light still filtered through the windows like old regrets. I set the box on the shelf next to the display of family keepsakes and paused. My throat tightened when I read the tag, from Dad and Mom to Darla and family. This was my gift. I'd picked it out thinking we were reconnecting. That the cabin meant all of us again. Darla's eyes caught mine. She said, "Oh, you sent that? We've decided to use it for display." Her voice was casual, but there was something cold in the corner of it. The kids shuffled in the background, looking uneasy. And I realized this wasn't about generosity. It was a statement. I thought of a quote I once read: "Recognition withheld is the theft of someone's story." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, quiet. I let them look at me. Let them feel that something had shifted. I decided then, this ends tonight, not with drama, but with clarity. I picked up the family calendar hanging in the hall. Each month featured the cabin and Darla's family smiling in the pine light. My face wasn't there. I flipped through the revamped photo album on the coffee table. There I was as a child, smiling at summer fires and snow days, and now I was gone. Edited out. I felt the ground shift. This wasn't simply exclusion, it was erasure. I texted Clara, "Need motion for temporary ownership by morning." Darla shifted next to me, voice unsteady. "It's just family memories evolving. You get it, right?" I didn't respond. Instead I stood up. Everyone looked. No more hidden messages. No more ambiguous silences. I placed the deeds, the screenshots, the attic letter, the calendar page, all of it on the glass coffee table. "Let's not do this again, I am not invisible," I said. Darla rose, voice edged with something fragile. "You're making a scene." I looked at my father, silent, seated, then said, "When you buy silence, you pay in the currency of trust." The door slammed. Lonnie stormed off with the kids. Darla stared at me like she was trying to hold a mask in place. My mother just sat frozen, knitting needles still. I felt calm. The moment was mine. Outside the front porch, dusk settled deep. I stepped out, the mountain air crisp. I reflected that I came for rest, but this time I owned the fight. I thought of Maya Angelou's words: "You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, but still I'll rise." I folded my arms. I whispered into the cold air, "This house will know I was here." From my coat I pulled my phone and pressed send. The email to the county property fraud unit with all attachments went out. Inside the cabin, the family sat scattered, Darla's expression cracked, Mom wiped a single tear, Dad didn't look up. Then the beep on my phone, sheriff's deputy en route. Need access to property records. My heart pounded, not in fear. In readiness. I stepped back into the doorframe. Softly I said, "I won't leave. But tonight, I stay to watch you fold." The headlights arrived. The mountain night rose. The unmasking began. The light was already pouring through the cabin windows when I opened my eyes. Not harsh. Gentle, like the world had finally exhaled. I sat up slowly from the couch, same couch I used to nap on as a kid. Something in the air had changed. Not just the quiet, but the weight of it. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed a fight, it was the kind that came after a war had ended. No raised voices. No doors slamming. No footsteps stomping through the wood floor. Just peace. And for once, that peace wasn't hollow. I got up, wrapped myself in my old cardigan, and started the coffee pot. The pine trees outside were powdered with a fresh dusting of snow, and the steam rising from my mug seemed to carry with it every piece of anger I'd been holding in. I leaned against the counter, watching the first golden rays spread across the kitchen table where so many fights had taken root. I said quietly to myself, "Peace doesn't always follow justice, but I'll take clarity any day." As I moved to finish packing, I opened the sewing cabinet to collect a few of Mom's old threads. A small cloth-wrapped bundle was tucked in the back, buried behind tangled spools and faded buttons. I pulled it out, leather-bound, worn at the corners. A journal. Her handwriting. I sat down, hands trembling just a little, and began to read. Entries dated back to the year the cabin was first deeded to me. Page after page, her conflict, her fear, her silence. She wrote about how she didn't agree with Dad and Darla, but didn't speak up because she didn't want to cause rift. One line hit me straight in the gut: she thinks no one sees her. I see her. I always have. I didn't cry loud. Just let the tears fall, one after another, onto the yellowed page. Then, as if timed by something older than both of us, she passed quietly behind me. Didn't say a word. But she placed a hand on my shoulder. Just 1 second longer than necessary. And that meant more than the whole journal. Later, I walked out to the entryway with a freshly printed declaration in hand. I nailed it gently to the wooden beam above the door. This cabin belongs to Maris Gennaro, whose silence was mistaken for absence. I snapped a photo, just for me. Saved it in a folder I called Truth. Darla walked in with her youngest. She paused. Read it all the way through. Didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. One of the kids, maybe 7 or 8, looked up at me and asked, "Are you the one who built the tree swing?" I looked at him and smiled without bitterness. Yes, I am. The sheriff's situation resolved without spectacle. Clara had everything in order. They had 10 days to vacate. There were no last-minute appeals. No shouting matches. Just quiet papers passed from one hand to another. I made arrangements with a non-profit in town to use the cabin occasionally for storytelling retreats, therapy weekends, veteran families. Real people. Real stories. Clara brought lemon cake on her last visit. "You've rewritten your story," she said. "On your terms." I nodded. And for the first time, I truly believed her. I stood in front of the cabin one last time before heading out. New keys in my pocket, not to lock people out, but to keep something sacred in. I turned them over in my palm. They didn't feel heavy. As the truck rolled down the mountain road, the trees opened up like curtains, slowly closing on a long, worn act. I thought of Toni Morrison: freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. And now, I was both. A month later, I launched my podcast. Episode 1, The Day I Walked Into My Cabin and Found Someone Else's Life. And that's when my real voice began.